Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the Soviet Tier 7 medium tank, the T-43. This is a machine that's been in the game for quite a long time now. In fact, I think since the game's inception. Let's have a look and see how good it is. So, again, as usual, we'll start off with some historical background. The T-43. In the partway through the Second World War, there was a call from the Soviet military to have a tank with the mobility of the T-34. That was, of course, their medium tank at the time, but with the armoured protection of a heavy tank, so of the KV-1. And there were a couple of different designs put forward to meet this brief, one of which was the KV-13, which, while it wouldn't see mass production itself, would go on to form the basis of the very successful and prevalent IS series of tanks, named of course after the Soviet Union's premier, Joseph Stalin. And the other was the T-43. Now this was a development of the T-34 designed to up-armour it, basically. And the bureau who designed this had previously experimented with the T-34M, which is, I believe, actually in the game as a Soviet medium tank, basically an up-armoured T-34. And so, as this thing was put forward, it had the same 76mm gun you saw on the T-34, but it had the 75mm of hull armour, very much in common with the KV-1. And it had a boosted engine to allow you to still maintain mobility on the battlefield. Now, as things went, the Soviets increasingly, of course, encountered improved German armour in the shape of the Tiger and the Panther, and it was decided that the 76mm gun on the T-34 was, and by extension on the T-43, was inadequate for the task, and actually far more important than up-armouring the T-43, because a bit more armour on the T-43, but this, the Panther and the Tiger could still put a big hole in that. The advantage from the extra armour in that sense was minimal. But more important than that was up-gunning the machine, and so instead of commencing T-43 production, what they actually did, of course, was modify the T-34, give it a modified turret ring, a larger turret, and mount an 85mm gun in the tank to give it a gun capable of challenging the Tiger, the Panther, the heavier German armour at the time. So this thing was not ever actually put into production. Now, it's interesting when you get to World of Tanks, because historically this was a competitor to the KV-13, but it was an upgrade of the T-34. In the game, it's an upgrade of the T-34-85, which was actually, as I mentioned, historically the tank that was chosen and was the reason the T-43 was not put into production. Anyway, just an interesting point to note. So, this tank has been in the game for a very long time. What do we actually get? Well, 1100 hit points. We're at Tier 7, that's about par for the course. Hit point pool between 1,000 and 1,200 is about average for a Tier 7 medium tank. You get some machines, the Chiri and the Panther, that have significantly more, but 1,100 is a very respectable amount. It's a 35-ton tank with a 600 horsepower engine, giving it a fairly respectable horsepower to ton ratio of 17. So that is fairly nice. Top speed of 51 kilometers an hour. Really, you're only actually going to see that going downhill, because whilst the engine on this machine is pretty good, the ground resistance values on the suspension are not actually as impressive. And it means that if you compare this, for example, to its competitor at Tier 7, if you will, the KV-13, this gets a better horsepower to ton ratio, but the KV-13 gets better ground resistance values. And in my experience, in practice, the KV-13 actually feels a bit faster. 36 degree per second hull traverse. Again, of course, you have to remember that is just a parameter used in the calculation of the tank's actual traverse speed, which will be a function of that stated traverse speed, its engine power, and the type of terrain that it's on. Hull armour of 75mm all around, front, side and rear, and as we will see in a moment, that is fairly uniform thickness. Turret armour of 90, 90 and 90, which is nothing special, but the hull armour is worthy of note. We'll come on to that a bit later on, but it means that this tank can actually be surprisingly effective, angling its armour, side scraping and all that. The gun we'll talk about a bit in a minute, but you're going to have been used to this gun by now. Turret traverse of 46 degrees a second is actually pretty good. 370 meter view range is nothing to get too excited about at tier 7. 525 meter signal range, I mean, it's bad, but I don't think you're really going to notice that the vast majority of the time. So I said we're going to take a look at the gun in a bit. Let's have a look at the sort of three guns available on this tank. Now, tier 7 medium tanks have a bit of a reputation for... Sorry, let's just get rid of that. Oh no, that is the gun we want, never mind. For not really feeling like an upgrade over their tier 6 counterparts. They tend to use the same guns that the tier 6s were able to use, and that is definitely the true of the T-43. So you have three guns on this tank, but one of them you're never going to use. This is the 85mm ZIS S53. It's an 85mm gun with 126 penetration, 160 average damage, terrible accuracy, but let's just focus on 126mm of penetration at tier 7 with full matchmaking spread? No, thank you very much. I mean, 126mm of penetration, to give you an idea, that's the penetration value of the Easy 8 Sherman, the Jumbo, using that 76mm gun, or of the Type 58, and that kind of works at tier 6. It's also the A43's penetration, close enough. But you wouldn't really want to be using that at tier 7 if you can avoid it, and you can avoid it, so you don't. So really you have two guns with this machine. The 122mm U11 howitzer. This is a gun that you can have unlocked on the KV-1, the T-34-85 at tier 6, which is this machine's predecessor, and I used it for the purposes of grinding. I would not recommend using this as a top gun on this tank, but it's a perfectly usable grinding gun until you unlock the turret, allowing you to mount this 85mm gun. I mention until you unlock the turret, not until you unlock the gun, because this is the same gun you were using on the T-34-85 at tier 6. It's been buffed in a few different parameters, but it's essentially the same gun. 144 penetration, 180 alpha damage. And actually the bloom values on this gun are not that good. And this means that it feels like a bit of a potato gun. It's slightly dodgy accuracy. The effective aim time is actually not very good. If you compare this same gun mounted on the KV-85, sorry, not the KV-85, the KV-13, the other tier 7, or the other tier 7 Soviet medium tank that is comparable to this machine, what you find is that the T-43 gets the better rate of fire, but the KV gets the better bloom values, and so in practice it gets the better aiming stats. In my opinion, this gun is better on the KV, but that will come down to a matter of opinion. But it's the same gun you were using on the T-34-85 at tier 6. And that's really what this machine feels like, a T-34-85 at tier 7. Kind of. Let's talk quickly about the grind, and then we'll get into crew skills and whatnot. So, we are here at tier 7. Okay, so there are a gazillion different ways of getting, well, I say gazillion, there are 1, 2, 3 different ways of getting to the T-34 at tier 5. I'm not going to go through them all in detail. I mean, good lord, I've got plenty of videos that briefly talk about different ways of getting to the T-34, so I'm not going to go into it yet again. It's a linchpin in the Soviet tech line. T-34 is a perfectly decent tier 5 medium tank. You then have 4 places actually, if you include the tank destroyers. 4 places you can go from the T-34. The one we're looking at is to the T-34-85, which I have a review of on my channel, and then to the T-43. And when you get to the T-43, what is it that your stock grind actually looks like? Well, the stock gun is this 85mm ZIS S53, which I mentioned when I was quickly talking about the guns, but in my opinion, you do not want to use this gun if you can avoid it. It was bad on the T-34-85, it's bad on the T-43. You're probably better off mounting the howitzer, 122mm U11 howitzer, which you can have unlocked on the T-34-85 anyway. So if you've got any sense, you should already have that unlocked, and it should make your grind a bit easier. This is the top gun, which you already unlocked on the T-34-85, but you require the turret to mount it. So you don't have access to this gun yet. This radio is used on a gazillion different machines and its wife, but importantly the T-34-85 and the T-34 at tiers 6 and 5 respectively. So you've already got this radio unlocked. Engines, well, this is where it starts getting slightly frustrating, or slightly odd. Let's go with odd, not frustrating. You have this engine here, which has 560 horsepower, 12% chance of setting on fire, and is usable on the T-43, the Su-101 and the T-44. So, assuming you haven't gone down any of the other Soviet lines, you're not going to have this engine unlocked yet. You then have this engine, which has 600 horsepower, so would be preferable, but you already can have unlocked this on the T-34-85, and it's also used on the Su-100M. So you just mount this engine immediately, and you kind of wonder why this is even an option. To be fair, it's probably worth unlocking, because at the very least you can use it on the Su-101, the tank destroyer at tier 8, and the T-44, I guess, the medium tank at tier 8, as this engine, which is the top engine on the T-43, doesn't carry over to its tier 8 counterpart. So it's probably still worth unlocking this engine, but it seems a bit of an odd setup. So your stock grind on this thing looks like stock suspension, top engine, top radio, and U-11 howitzer. You're going to have to get the suspension at some point, and the turret and the gun. I can't remember if you need the suspension to mount the turret and top gun. Just have a look and see what you can and can't get away with, and treat it appropriately. I don't think this tank is a painful enough grind to warrant wasting much free XP on, so I don't recommend you faff around with all that. I would just suck it up and play it. The grind isn't that painful. Crew skills and equipment, well, none of this is going to come as a massive surprise. Standard 3 consumable slots, you could switch these out to their premium versions, especially considering the fire extinguisher. You might really want to go for the automatic fire extinguisher. This is not a tank you can afford to take combat rations on. You take a lot of critical damage when you get shot at, and it has frontal fuel tanks. Those of you who've driven Chinese machines will be aware of how frustrating this can be, and so that's why I mention the automatic fire extinguisher may be quite a good idea. So I would recommend that, although I have a manual one here. In terms of ammo loadout, let me quickly switch back to the main gun again, just to quickly talk about that. Your armor-piercing ammo has 144 average penetration, which at tier 7, well, the best thing you can say about it is it generally gets the job done. It's nothing to get excited about. APCR, that penetration jumps up to almost 200mm. Carrying a few rounds of that is not a terrible idea. Your HE rounds on this gun, and this is in common with the T-34-85, the KV-13, and anything else that can use this gun, are surprisingly good. 44 penetration, and your damage goes from 180 to 300. That's a very large step up. Surprisingly large. And so the HE ammunition on this tank is actually pretty good in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's still not the ammo you're going to be using by choice most of the time, but it's pretty respectable. One thing to bear in mind is that the 48 rounds of ammunition you get with this tank really don't actually go that far. You know, I tend to find that you can burn through the ammo quite quickly, you have a respectable reload time, and your gun's not very accurate, so you end up firing quite a lot of shots. What about equipment? Well, I used a grinding set of equipment when I was playing this tank. I've since put proper equipment on, if you will, to try and get my ace tanker in it. As you can see, I haven't got it yet. I've currently got rammer, vents, and coated optics. This is a tier 7 medium tank, but it's not British or American, so no vertical stabilizers for you, which is a little bit sad. Any other options that are worth taking? Toolbox you could take, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. You could fill the CO2 tanks with fill the fuel tanks with CO2 to try and reduce the number of fires you get, but it's 500,000 credits and it takes the place of another equipment piece, so I'm not convinced. If you find the gun particularly frustrating, maybe you'd want to switch out the vents for an enhanced gun laying drive. I don't know. If you find the view range particularly unimpressive, you might want to swap out optics for binos. There's nothing else really to talk about if we're going to be honest, but they're the 3 equipment pieces that I would recommend. This maximises your DPM and improves your gun handling, your mobility in the case of vents, and also improves your view range, takes it above 400 meters. which of course increases your effectiveness, especially in those tier 9 games. Crew skills, well, there's nothing particularly surprising here. Sixth Sense on your commander, safe stowage on your loader. Repairs on everyone else, pretty much. Don't pay too much attention necessarily to the skills I've got on this crew. I've no idea why I'm trading Brothers in Arms on my gunner. I honestly haven't got a clue. I think I originally made this crew when I was an idiot. Some might argue I still am. Yeah, I don't know why I've got that. You might want to go with repairs as your first skill across the board, and then if you retrain for gold, when you hit 100%, retrain for gold for things like Sixth Sense and safe stowage. If, like me, you retrain for silver, then when you do that retraining, you will take an XP hit, and so it will take you longer to hit Sixth Sense, for example. And so if you're retraining for silver, I would probably recommend your first set of skills to be Sixth Sense for your commander, safe stowage for your loader, repairs on the other two, and then swap out one of these pieces of equipment for a toolbox so that you don't have a problem with the terrible repair speed on things like your tracks. So that would be my advice. The other thing worth noting on this tank is that it gets 8 degrees of gun depression, which as far as Soviet medium tanks go is actually pretty decent. And influences how you end up wanting to play this. If you can expose only your turret, do so. I mean, the smallest amount of exposure is good, clearly. And I mentioned that 75mm of hull armour, which means you can angle and side scrape, and that is very true, but it is limited by the fact that you have this very frontal mounted turret. And so if you're trying to side scrape round a corner, in order to make best use of your armour, you can't actually shoot anyone. Reverse side scraping, however, is an option. Highly angle the side, point the turret backwards, cover your rear with a wall or something, and you can actually have some success doing that. It also doesn't expose your frontal fuel tanks, which we'll get onto in a moment, but they're sitting just here, next to the driver, which I'm sure makes the driver ever so happy. So, let's go and have a look at things like critical module locations and the armour profile. So let's have a quick look at the critical module locations for this tank then. Looking at it from the front, you've got this blue section here, which is where the driver sits. Not hugely surprising, it's right behind this driver's hatch. And next to him, on the right-hand side of the machine, if you are looking at it frontally, you get the fuel tank, or a fuel tank. And this is what gives you so many problems. People shoot you, people hit you, people penetrate here, and the fuel tank goes whoosh, and suddenly you're burning, and you're using your fire extinguisher, and you're hoping you don't burn a second time. But that is a very viable option, so fuel tank damage is actually quite a big problem. Moving on to the side profile, it's not that much better. In fact, it possibly even gets worse. Yeah, I know. So obviously you have your crew members in the turret. Standard deal, so you've got your gunner, loader and commander all in the turret. I'm not going to really pay too much mention of those guys. You've still got the fuel tank if you're looking at this tank from its left hand side, because that fuel tank in the front also extends round to the side. And you've got the engine at the rear, so shots there are going to be a problem. You also have an ammo rack toward the rear of the turret. There might be an additional ammo rack in the hull, although I can't see one on this schematic. But they are to be, you should be careful of those. From the rear, you've got big fat engine in the bum, and of course again you've got crew in the turret and whatnot. From the other side of the tank, it is a better story because that frontal fuel tank is only on the left-hand side of the machine, it's not on the right-hand side. So, from this side, if you shoot in the front of the hull, you might injure the driver. And if your shots pass straight the way through, they may still damage fuel tanks, and if you shoot at the back here, you will damage the engine, but it's not quite as bad a situation as it was from the other side, in my opinion. And from the top, I mean, there isn't really that much to say here. There's no more magical module locations to worry about. But one I really want to highlight is this frontal fuel tank that can be really problematic. So here we go with the T-43's armour. Just to quickly mention the gun depression first, it is 8 degrees over the front and toward the rear of the tank. It's only at the back where the gun depression actually gets noticeably worse. So pointing your gun directly over the engine deck, you will get worse gun depression, but everywhere else it's 8 degrees. Now let's talk about the armour. In the garage it said that the turret was 90mm and the hull was 75. Everywhere in each case. And for once, it's actually true. 75, 75, 75, 90, 90, 90. And that means that if you, for example, angle this tank, your hull suddenly jumps up to about 130 on front and side. Now, 130 at tier 7 is still not actually very good. It isn't bad enough to bounce the German short 88 guns, but that's about it. And lower tier machines, perhaps. So your armour becomes decent against lower tiers. If you side scrape in this thing, you can start getting some very funky armour thicknesses on the side of the armour, but then you can't shoot anyone. If you reverse side scrape, however, you get the advantages of this armour thickness. You know, some of this is silly, while still being able to shoot people. In the case of the turret, 90mm all round. I mean, that doesn't mean people are going to struggle to penetrate the side of your turret, for example, but 90mm plus gun mantlet means 191, 229... You don't want to shoot this thing in the gun mantlet if you can possibly get away with it. There is a nice commander's hatch up here, but again, it's 90mm thick. Turret roof is 30, so if you've got a 90mm gun or larger, you might be able to overmatch the turret roof, although frankly, most 90mm guns will just be able to punch straight through this tank without too much difficulty. So the armour is actually as advertised, and is, in the grand scheme of things, for a tier 7 medium tank, pretty good. But not enough to save you against those tier 9s or those very high penetration guns. So I find in most situations it doesn't actually tend to make that much difference. So as ever, starting off with a top tier game, hence tier 7 game, and if you look at the matchmaking for this game, it is very, very good matchmaking. There is only one tier 7 on each side, myself on our team, and a KV3 on the enemy team. This is a patch 9.9 game, so this was before this map, Hidden Village, was removed. There's a bunch of tier 6s on each team, and then a score of tier 5s, sorry. Although the enemy do have the slightly short end of the stick, I guess, with regards to matchmaking, potentially. They have a tier 4 light tank, whereas we do not. We have a tier 5 light tank, which as far as matchmaking is concerned is effectively a tier 6. But I guess the flip side is they have more heavy tanks, and generally speaking, your typical World of Tanks player finds it easier to play a heavy tank because it tends to be slightly more forgiving than a medium or a light tank. Now, we're initially on Hidden Village here, coming over to, well, the village, and going up this little slope here. It's quite often that you'll find medium tanks to tangle with over here. And if you can secure this position, then you can put fire toward the sort of E6 kind of region. And I didn't really want to go along G4 because that just ends up with you being in a linear frontal engagement. And as I mentioned, they have more heavy tanks, including a top tier heavy tank, so that just didn't seem like a great plan. Now, I'm using just some generic grinding equipment, I believe, for both of these games, so bear in mind if you were to fit proper equipment, if you will, then your tank will perform slightly better, you know. So just bear that in mind. Trying to get a shot on this MT-25, and I am actually able to put one in. A slightly low damage roll, but I'm not going to complain too much about that. Our T-34 has pushed up way too far, the T-34-85 that is, and he is getting badly worked over. There's a T1 there. This time we're rewarded with a slightly above average damage roll. Average damage, of course, on this gun being 180. And there is a mighty box tank. And again, we managed to put a shot into him. So far the gun is behaving, which is nice, but I can assure you that is not always the case. And there we go, that one fails to penetrate. Might have damaged his tracks if I'm lucky, but it certainly didn't do actual HP damage. Trying to focus on this box tank because he has a big gun, but he gets himself behind cover, so switch targets to the SU-100. And I managed to bounce a shot there, which felt a bit like a heat round, but I could always be wrong. Scoreline is 6-6, so things are rather even. We've put a few shots in so far, I mean nothing particularly spectacular. Don't have Sixth Sense as I'm playing this, so have to bear that in mind. Managed to put a shot into the T1 Heavy, which allows our T-34 to finish him off. And that evens the scores up again at 7-7. So it's myself and this Type 58 over on this side of the map, basically facing off against an SU-100 and the potential of a T-34. We just lost our Dicamax, and I'm very, very conscious of the fact that the enemy KV-3 is over, as to be expected, on that sort of linear section of the map at kind of G4. And really there's nothing on our team apart from the tank destroyers that can face off against him. Now our SU-100, sorry, our Hellcat takes out the enemy SU-100, who takes it rather badly. And now we're in an interesting position. I go back to defend our base because I think these guys are going to need all the support they can get against that KV-3 and his friends. And our Type 58, I tell the team that I'm heading back to base, and our Type 58 pushes on. Well, I'm not sure if he's pushing on toward the enemy base. It looks like he is, but he's certainly not going back to ours. All that stands between that KV-3 now and our base is was a VK3001P and our artillery. So this is looking actually rather dodgy. And there goes the Type 58 as well. He gets nailed by a T-34. And suddenly we are 2 tanks down. And here you can see the kind of lackluster engine power on this tank. I'm doing 20-21 kilometers an hour going uphill. Now hopefully the KV-3 doesn't know I'm here, so I should be able to get off an ambush shot. KV-3 is actually using the small gun, the 100mm gun by the look of it, not the big boomstick. It has its pros and its cons. Put a second shot into him. And suddenly there's just the 2 of us left, myself and this FV304 artillery piece. Now I put a couple of rounds into that KV-3 and then relocate. They do still have artillery on the enemy team. He's already picked up 2 kills, so we have to assume that that guy knows what he's doing. And you can see I've actually switched to APCR ammo here. I don't actually need to have switched per se, but I do it because I really... We're down tanks here, and I really want to make sure this KV-3 dies. KV-3 fires, flubs his shot, I've got the reload. And, I mean, none of these shots need to be APCR. Need to make sure he dies. There we go. I could have done that with good old-fashioned regular armor piercing. Unfortunately, I now have a T-34 up my wazoo. So I could have done that with good old-fashioned regular armor piercing, but I didn't know what engagement angle I was going to have. This is a very close game, and I wanted to make sure of the kill as much as I possibly can. You know, that KV-3 is easily the most heavily armored tank in this game. T-34 is being a nuisance, so I target him, take him out, picking up a second kill, and there's an SU-100 behind me now. It looks like the SU-100 fired, but I'm not convinced that he's actually using the big gun. Either way, he is also now dead. The M6, it looked like maybe he had connection problems, as he was earlier on driving towards me with his turret pointing the other way. No, it appears he's now back in the game. Put a shot into him, he puts a shot into me. He actually hits harder than me. He has a 90mm gun to my 85, which is slightly awkward. Put another shot into him, he puts one into me. I should have the reload on this guy, and he's tracked, and he's dead. And that just leaves the scoreline 2 kills apiece. And if memory serves, he takes that quite poorly. There's the Dickermax. He is behind me, which is slightly awkward. Take a shot on the move. And I need to get out of here. I can perhaps survive one more shot from the Dickermax. There we go. But as it is, our FV304 comes to our rescue and nails that fellow. That just leaves the enemy M44 remaining. So I thank our FV and switch to high explosive rounds. I can't remember how much health an M44 has off the top of my head. Probably more than the 180 alpha damage I have with my AP rounds. So I'm going with my 300 alpha HE rounds. And the M6 is blaming Wargaming for the fact that his internet connection balked out. I very much doubt it's Wargaming's fault, if I'm going to be honest. There's the M44 and the FV304 shotguns him in the face. And that is the game. So it ended up being quite a frantic game in the end, but let's go and have a look at the results for this one. So that was enough for a first class mastery fighter, duelist, fire for effect, bruiser, steel wall and high caliber. We picked up 2,931 damage, 4 kills, 1,030 base experience, remembering of course a lot of the targets just because of the matchmaking. Most of my targets were lower tier than me, with the exception of that KV-3, so although it was almost 3,000 damage, relatively, and I wasn't really, you know, a lot of the time it was at quite close range, but a lower XP than you might expect because they were lower tier targets than myself. Our FV also had a good game. I couldn't have done that without him at the end, so a big shout out to LRDG1. Thank you very much. And commiserations to Be Quick or Be Dead for his internet walking out. 23 shots fired, 18 hits, 17 pens, so that's not too bad for that damage count, most of which was at closer than 300 meters. We received 12 hits, of which 5 penetrated and 7 did not. Bearing in mind a number of those shots were in the rear from that T-34. One bit of splash damage, over 800 damage blocked with our armour, and we got 400 something assistance damage into the bargain, travelling 3 kilometers. Now, take my credit earning from that game with a bit of a pinch of salt. If memory serves, and this must be the case, I fired 4 APCR rounds in that game just to try and secure the damage on that KB3. And they don't show up here. I believe they were pre-bought because I had them left over from when I played the KV3 or something. I think this was the first time I'd fired any APCR rounds while I was driving the T-43. In fact, if memory serves, I think it might be the only time I ever bothered firing APCR with this tank. So bear in mind, my ammunition resupply costs should actually be considerably higher. And if you factor those in, I will actually have made very little profit from this game. With a standard account, with a premium account, I would have still have made a moderately healthy profit. So that was the top tier game with very, very nice matchmaking. Now a lot of people say tier 7 medium tanks do not like being bottom tier, and they're kind of right, but we're going to go and have a look at the bottom tier game right now and show you some of the things you can do anyway. So here we go with the bottom tier, hence tier 9 game. As ever, as usual, you know, showing a top tier game and a bottom tier game to try and give you a more holistic idea of what you can achieve with a decent, if not completely outstanding game in these tanks. We're here on Redshire, which kind of works in my favour. If you've got a very close range confined map, it can be difficult to have an impact on the game in your bottom tier medium and light tanks in particular, because all the engagements tend to be frontal. And what am I going to do in a frontal engagement against an E75? The answer is die. Redshire is a more open map, and it gives a far greater opportunity for things like spotting, scouting, harassing, and flanking fire, supporting fire. You know, all those things that don't involve a front-on engagement. So initially I'm coming up to these bushes at G5. I'm not being too aggressive. You know, I'm not really a scout per se. The T-43 sorry, isn't really fast enough. I do, however, have 8 degrees of gun depression to work with, which isn't too shabby. And my logic is that if someone can spot these guys, then I should hopefully be able to put some shots into their flanks. Our T-54 Mod 1 goes the other side of the hill area, if you will, which is generally speaking not a particularly good plan. I decided to take a blind shot against that T-30, as it exposes you to a lot of fire, including fire from the inevitable hill campers at D4. So where that T-54 Mod 1 went is, well, in short, it's a terrible place to go, so don't go there. Trying to pick out shots on this Panther 2, but to no avail. We know there's a couple of tank destroyers up on the hill at G4C5, that Panther 2 and the AMX AC-48, so we need to be wary of that. Looks like I might just have a shot on the side of the turret of that Panther 2, but it's a very slim shot, and this gun is not accurate, let's put it that way. So far the score line is even at 1 apiece. They've lost a Spar Panzer 1C, we've lost that T-54 Mod 1, so, you know, roughly evens. T-54E1 now trying for a shot into the side of the turret. He actually moves, so I don't even hit him. But even if I'd hit him, there's no guarantee I would have penned. Tiger 2, however, looks like he's even using the stock turret. I can shoot him any day of the week, certainly in the side like that. Going for a shot on the side of the turret, but gun misses. Like I mentioned, this gun is not especially accurate. Going for another shot, 189 into the side of his turret. Bounce that one, alas, there's that accuracy coming into play, or lack thereof. You know, these are 500 meter shots, and as it turns out, our artillery manages to nuke that Tiger 2 in the end. Anyway, now if you pay attention to the enemy tank destroyers, you'll notice they've actually pushed on our position, and the Panther 2 has made it to F4, which is actually not the best position in the world to be in for him, but it's still something we need to be wary of in case he pops up and tries to spot us. T-34-2, that's the Chinese medium tank. Yeah, don't really have a good shot. I mean, he's a very low profile machine for all its faults. Don't really have a good shot, but I might have a shot on the T-25AT. Indeed I do, and there we go. There's 218 health that he wasn't using, or he isn't using anymore. He decides to take that as a hint to back off. Can't really say I blame him. T-34-2 now. Shot goes wide. Doesn't go anywhere near him. And that one just hits a rock. And with engagements like this, you have to be kind of careful because the... as I've probably mentioned, the ammo count on this tank is not actually that fantastic. And you can start burning through your rounds at quite an alarming rate of knots. So that's something to be wary of. T-30 now is pushing up, and I believe this is before the T-30 got his HD model. One shot him, set him on fire, and I mentioned the HD model because the HD model effectively buffed the side armour of that tank. He clearly had an automatic fire extinguisher. There's no way he'd have been that quick to put the fire out with a manual fire extinguisher, not least of all because a manual fire extinguisher, the fire goes on for at least, I believe it's 3 clicks before it activates, regardless of how quick you are on the extinguish button. Now, everybody on our team who went to the 0 line is now dead, which is a little bit sad, leaving the scoreline at 7-7. And our E75 is complaining about our top tier platoon. Now this is kind of awkward. We have no top tier tanks left. They have 3. So despite the fact that in terms of numbers, it looks like a fairly even fight, in reality, their greater number of top tier tanks is going to shift this significantly in their favour. T-30, I put a shot into him, but he's managed to find some cover now. There's another one. I mean, if he's going to give me nice free shots into his side, I will take them. He's a valuable target. Alas, that one bounced. And it's definitely worth taking him out if we possibly can. I'm trying to keep myself bushed so that they don't spot me. I don't have 6th Sense on this tank at the time when I played this game. There's a blind shot. So I do need to be very wary of getting spotted and killed. Shots on the side of an E75 are not particularly good. Generally speaking, I mean, at this range, the side of that tank, even flat on, can quite happily bounce 175mm of average penetration. And this gun certainly does not have 175mm of average penetration. You know, it's 144 or something like that. So I'm working over the Lerva instead. And taking shots on the Lerva by preference. But nonetheless, you know, with a high penetration roll or being a little bit fortunate about where the shot lands, we can still put damage into that E75. T-34-2, of course, we can definitely push damage into, as demonstrated there. I'm just trying to work these guys over as much as I possibly can. But I'm now running the risk that that T-34-2 is going to spot me, and that's going to be very sad. There we go, I've been spotted, and I'm dead. And that's how quickly these games can end for you, of course, in your Tier 7 medium tanks in a Tier 9 game. I got spotted, I think I took 3 hits and I died. 3 hits in quick succession. I imagine it were, well, one of them was from the T-34, and then I imagine it was probably one shot from the E-75, and then one from either the Lerva or the T-54E1. Didn't feel like I took a shot big enough to be the T-30 unless he was using the stock gun. Anyway, I digress. The point of this replay was to give you an idea of the gun performance, the fact that you can still deal out a fair amount of damage, even in Tier 9 games, providing you have the side of their tank to shoot at. But if you get spotted, you know, don't expect to last very long. If I had 6th Sense, I might have been able to pull back sooner and get off another shot or 2 before the game ended, but I don't think it would have significantly altered the result of this game. Speaking of which, let's go and have a look at those results. So, despite the defeat, that ended up being enough for 3rd class mastery, and that's without any epic achievements or anything, so I didn't get heroic resistance for this game. That's 3rd class mastery just based on the raw base experience. Fire for Effect and Bruiser. Finished 2nd on our team behind that E75. We got 2,894 damage without firing any APCR in a Tier 9 game, which is pretty Nice. 1 kill, 535 base experience. Commiserations to our E75. 3,500 damage, 3 kills, still not enough for the win. The enemy team just had more consistent damage dealers. What is interesting, however, is that we finished second on our team by damage dealt. And if we also factor in how much damage the enemy team did, the only guy on the enemy team who outdamaged us was the T-30. So we finished third in the game on damage dealt, again, in a tier 7 medium tank with less than 150 pen, firing nothing but armor piercing, so that's not too shabby. 28 shots fired, 20 hits, 16 pens, that gives you an idea of the kind of accuracy of that gun for that damage count, most of which was from more than 300 meters. We received 4 hits, I thought it was 3, it was 4 as it turns out. They all penetrated and we died. Damaged 7 enemy tanks, killed 1, didn't travel as far as the last game because frankly most of the time we were camping bush, and made an 11,800 credit profit on that defeat. So there we go, 1 top tier game, 1 bottom tier game to give you an idea of how the tank performs. Now let's just go and wind things down in the garage. What do I think of this tank? Well, I know there are some people out there who really like it. I am aware these people exist. Personally, I think it's junk. So bear in mind, I didn't really like the T-34-85 at tier 6. I could see why people liked it, but it really wasn't my cup of tea. And this feels like very much kind of more of the same at tier 7. If I wanted to play a tier 7 Soviet medium tank that was like this, I would go and play the KV-13, put up with the worst gun depression, and have comparable or possibly better armor. What is, in my opinion, a better performing gun. I prefer the faster aiming time over the better DPM. It feels more mobile to me. Yeah, I would rather play the KV-13. Or you can go and play the A44, which certainly has a lot of character, regardless of what else you might say about it. It's a very distinctive machine, but I wouldn't choose to play the T-43, and the number of times you get set on fire in this damn thing is so frustrating. So I do not recommend this machine. I really, really don't like it. In fact, it is my least favourite Soviet medium tank thus far, except possibly the T-28 at tier 4, which I really didn't like. But I really am not a fan of this machine, and it does not come with my recommendation at all. I would much rather play, as I say, either the A44 or the KV-13 or the tier 7 medium tanks that I actually like, the Comet and the Panther. I appreciate that puts me in a slightly odd box, perhaps, because the Panther's not the most popular machine in the world, but go figure. I really like it. So that's my opinion on the T-43. I think it's pretty junky. Some people do enjoy it. I've only still got it because I haven't aced it yet. Once I eventually ace this machine, then I will purchase the T-44, move the crew up, and not look back, really. And the T-43 is looking a little bit more of the same, if I'm going to be honest. But we'll see. I mean, it looks again like a very generic Tier 8 medium tank, in the same way that the T-43 is kind of a generic Tier 7 medium tank, but with a propensity for burning. Not a great combination. I mean, the armor difference that this has over some of the other Tier 7 medium tanks, I don't really feel that you notice all that much. I don't really feel that it's worth it. So it's not my cup of tea. Anyway, but by all means try it out. So regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed that review. Possibly found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.